Hello, I'm Dr. William Schlosser, Washington State University, School of the Environment. This is my classroom.
But right here now, we're going to step in to talk about question number 4. This is where we're going to spend a bit of time, a speciation of the Tualapii black-tailed deer. Okay, now that species, you say, well, I haven't heard of that one. I heard of the Columbia blacktail, or how about the Sitka blacktail? Yeah, those are subspecies of Odocoileus hemionus variety Tualapii, or in this case, we're introducing Tualapii versus Columbiana, or up to the north, where we get into that Sitka blacktail, where it's a Sitka incis. Okay, so Tualapii, that's a spin around to say this happened very early in the semester. Okay, everybody had that number 1 and number 2 assignment. Number 1 asked you, hey, what's your name? What do you want to be called? And number 2 was tell me about yourself. One of the students in the class, that's TJ, he's going to join us for the discussion today, wrote in his introduction letter to talk about the deer on the Tualapii Indian Reservation. Okay, the Tualap Indian Reservation. I throw that I in there. That's artificial for this play around on the naming of a subspecies. He's talking about this Columbia black-tailed deer that has some incredible size, a different type of a style and structure. Okay, now let's take that a step further, because I listened to that right away. You know, Dr. Bill loves his deer and his elk. Okay, and I'm listening to this and had a number of conversations with TJ, saw some photographs. We're going to use those and talk it through to say, what if that Tualapii deer, black-tailed deer, was a real thing? I'm going to ask you about the speciation event that could have led to this incidence happening. Okay, so that is just the same kind of thing that we would do if we were talking about, let's say in the lecture videos, with the Cervus canadensis, the Rocky Mountain elk, that Cervus canadensis variety nelsoni. Okay, that's a different subspecies of the Cervus canadensis elk. Okay, we're starting to track that through because we talked about 4 different types of speciation in this class. Okay, we're going to walk through those, and I want you to apply which type of speciation event you think it could have been to name a Tualapii black-tailed deer. Okay, as we go through this, then we're just going to look for that and watch the flow that goes along. Those 4 different types of speciation. I'm going to walk them through and say, yeah, that's the incidence where we saw this Cervus canadensis split from what we had in Northern Asia to what we have in North America. At one time, you know that walk through, we did exactly this, walk through the allopatric, parapatric, and then sympatric speciation events. Okay, how do we start out? Well, we start right off the top. This was that global ice age. Okay, when that glaciers formed and we cut off all that land bridge idea of the water, it wasn't there. It's because that sea level dropped. It dropped about 300 meters. Holy cow, yeah, that all of a sudden exposed a lot of shorelines. Well, no, it's more than that. It created the boreal forest, because this is a number I want you to remember whenever you talk about this one, is to say that the current ice age started about 2 million years ago. It only really turned around not too long after that. Well, not too long ago from now. We're going to talk about those to say this was a part of the speciation event. It separated the 2 populations that were formed. We had elk on both sides of that land bridge. Well, okay, the land bridge was an ocean now. Okay, that's where we hit the allopatric speciation event. You find these kinds of events, you understand, hey, that had an effect. Now, I talk about the elk. Could that have been applied to, say, wolves? Oh, yeah, because that North Asia has wolves, and we have in North America wolves. They were connected as well. They were feeding on the elk. Hey, that was their connecting zone, right? They were just milling around in those areas. They were able to interact. But with the land bridge across, it's all brusted. Allopatric speciation lives there. Now step it over to Parapatric. You remember me talking about this one with the black spruce. Okay, in this case, the Species rubens, it had another glaciation event, but in this case, I'm going to the northeast in the United States, and I see this big population area. That big population area is the nexus of the entire species mix. Okay, that Species rubens, it spreads a little bit further to the south. But there we got some populations. Think about this one more like a metapopulation. We had them existing in those disjunct areas. Yeah, I talked about that one a lot because that strong species selection benefits said that the survivors that were in those areas, hey, they're going to form, they're going to speciate within their areas. Well, how do they speciate? What am I talking about? Remember said it. It is the restrictive environments where they live. The adaptive traits that they develop, okay, those mutations that every population goes through, that was set to say, I'm going to favor the mutations that fit this restrictive environment. Okay, you get down there to South Carolina and you can say that's going to be a lot different than the speciation events that could happen in Maine. Wow, different weather system, different climate, different elevations in some cases. Okay, that led to a different favoring of different species traits. Okay, that's my Parapatric speciation. What about this one now, the Parapatric speciation? This is Darwin's finches. Remember that one? Where we have that finch and it's spreading out to different areas. It's getting a fast movement to those new restrictive environments. There may be an opening, something in the species mix that says, hey, we got a place here for birds to live. Well, we walk through the criteria that follow on this one to say you're going to have mating occurs non-randomly. That means that these birds are going in purpose to say, I want to mate and breed in that habitat area. That's why I really feel good. Okay, I feel good. That means I'm fitting my niche. You got gene flow occurs unequally. That means I'm not going to take every participant here and share their genes in that new area. Okay, that new area being a place where that species is looking to fill the niche. It's looking to be a place where they can thrive. Okay, we're going to follow through to say the populations exist in either this continuous or discontinuous geographic areas. Okay, that one takes a big hit to say this is something that may be a novel environment, a place where perhaps they've existed before, but never with the population numbers or the concentrations that they have. That concentration one may really tip the scales on this one. How does it fit in and how do you see it happen? I want you to just walk these things through and look at this idea, this unequal dispersal. Whether it's the finches or let's say the Tualapii black-tailed deer, it may be this idea that we have this incomplete geographic ranges. That places where the population is held in check. Yeah, I can't spread to the south. I can't spread to the east or west. Maybe I can't do what the birds love to do, is go up in elevation. Well, let's say we don't have that elevation ability to spread. That's where the geographic ranges or the barriers start to give some push on this. And you could also look to the divergent expressions of behavior. Okay, what's that all about? Well, we could say in the Columbia black-tailed deer that Odocoileus hemionus variety columbianus, it is spread across a big range of western Washington and western Oregon, even into coastal British Columbia. Okay, that species is spreading into those ranges, and it gets different habitats that favor different diversities. Okay, I'm just kind of stumbling on it to say, do you think about that Columbia black-tailed deer? It's living in the Olympic Mountains. It's living in the Puget Sound lowlands. You're over there on the Kitsap Peninsula. You're all the way down into, well, call it getting around Olympia. You're going all the way to Oregon. All these different habitats that can exist there. If you were to catalyze or put them in a little bubble and say, hey, dear, you're not going to be able to leave this area. That's where you're going to live. That may be the fix that says now we're going to have different genetic trait sharing. And survivors, thrivers, hey, they're going to pass on that gene pool. That's where you have a parapatric speciation event. Okay, as we go across this entire range, what you're going to say is that speciation activity is going to have the ability to share genes with the nearest neighbor. You're not going to have that sterility that hit us with the Cervus canadensis discussion, that I can't breed an elk from, let's say, the Olympic Mountains with one from Yellowstone National Park. They're just too disjunct and separated to have a successful sharing of genes. What succeeded in the Olympics doesn't necessarily mean it's going to succeed in Yellowstone National Park. But now going back to this, what we would say for the black-tailed deer, that subspecies, as it gets these divergent areas, will you have different success on the left than you would on the right? That's really what this discussion takes us through. We're going to look at that idea and how could parapatric speciation fit. And we also had another speciation event, and that was a speciation of deer. In this case, it's the deer we know very well. This is right at Kamiak Butte, where we have the white-tailed deer and the black-tailed deer. Okay, this sympatric speciation had that second order of speciation arrive. It didn't happen overnight, and most likely it did happen in stages, like the first stage of speciation that we see with Cervus canadensis. with the varieties, like we're seeing with Odocoileus hemionus, the black-tailed deer, or in this case, the mule deer. Okay, we have a speciation event there, first order speciation, Odocoileus hemionus, the one on the left, that is our mule deer that lives on Kamiak Butte. We have the white-tailed deer on the right, but right now we're going to kind of push that one aside to say that was a sympatric speciation event. We can really look at that for just now the Odocoileus hemionus, that mule deer. Right? We know that right now our mule deer that we have right there at Kamiak Butte is Odocoileus hemionus variety hemionus. But we have this speciation event that has taken it to that first stage of incipient speciation. That is the Columbia blacktail right over there on the coast of Washington. It goes into Oregon. Golly, it touches into California. You can see going further north, you get all the way up there to the Sitka blacktail. Now, I got to kind of scratch my head a little bit on this map to say, I've been up on Vancouver Island quite a bit. I've seen the deer up there, the Columbia black-tailed deer. Wait a minute, they're really small. They're tiny in comparison. Now, I've seen them exactly on Prince of Wales Island in Alaska as well. They're really tiny. I mean, literally, you're talking about an animal who's 50, 60 pounds, dripping wet. Yeah, that's a much smaller animal. And you got to ask yourself, why would they go to smaller size? Well, it's back to that restrictive environment again. And throwing all these out there to say, we've got a discussion we need to make. Understand how that speciation event could happen. And right now, we got to be looking at further south, way down into California, Mexico. You see some breakpoints on some lines where you get a California mule deer, the Odocoileus hemionus variety californicus. I know they love to chime the bell about the californicus idea, but it's also a speciation event, a first order speciation. It's still Odocoileus hemionus, but we have that diversity there. You can see it going further south into Mexico. Different subspecies have formed. You know, let's spin this around and start talking about what we have right here. I'm going to bring TJ on to say, TJ, I'm going to ask you to be able to talk and share and kind of bring us into this mix of what we're looking at here. These are photographs on the right that TJ took on his game cameras. Are you with us, TJ?
Yes, I am.
Talk about what we're looking at for those still photographs versus that one on the left, which is the mule deer from Kamiak Butte.
Well, you're looking at 4 black-tailed deer that are just ginormous in size. I mean, they're significantly bigger than black-tailed deer you find in other places. The one in I believe the one in the top is the same as the one in the middle. They're either the same or they're 2 very similar bucks. Those are easily over 250 pounds apiece. You don't see that in black-tailed deer anywhere else. Same with the one down in the bottom left. That's a massive deer. The one on the right, he's a little bit smaller. He's probably 200 to 220 pounds, but he's still a really big deer for his age. And you don't really see that
deer for being a black-tailed deer. If you're talking about variety columbianus, that's monstrous.
Yeah. And you don't really see that in other places. And it's just kind of unique to the reservation. I mean, you just don't see it.
Now I'm going to ask you, TJ, have you been around, let's say into the Olympics, let's say Olympic Mountain, just right across the Puget Sound area there, we've got more Odocoileus hemionus variety columbianus, that Columbia black-tailed deer on the Olympics. How do you think those deer in size and activities, their behavior, their appearance, how do they differ from the deer on the Tualap Indian Reservation?
They're much smaller in size. Like the ones on the peninsula, they still get pretty big. Like they're probably about an average size blacktail, I'd say. They're not tiny like island deer or Sitka blacktail, but they're not these deer that you're seeing on the screen. As far as behavior, I think that they definitely have like a little bit similar behavior, but I mean, these ones are living in the lowlands where those are going up the mountain sometimes. So that's going to differ what they're eating, how they're acting towards each other, if they migrate or not.
You just hit on a very important component right there. As I talk about going over to the Olympic National Park, And I see the mountain ranges. I see a lot of topography relief there. That's one of the things that the mule deer, is the one that we see on that video that walked in. It's got hills to walk up and down, but on the Tualap Indian Reservation, you're really a lowlands area there. There isn't a lot of hills to climb. Am I right about that? Am I?
Yeah, there's not very
overstating it?
there's not very many hills on the reservation. I mean, we have some ravines, but those might change 100 feet in elevation, if that. I mean, we're not talking about a mountain that climbs a few thousand feet.
In other words, Pullman campus has perhaps more elevational relief than the Tualap Indian Reservation. Am I close?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, that's a restrictive environment, folks. That may be something that the Columbia black-tailed deer are absolutely responding to. I'm going to hit it a little bit more than that, though, because as we pitch this around, I'm now looking at Google Earth Pro. And right now, I need to pause the computer or pause the share for just a moment, because what's going on here? I'm missing my ability to share my screen just right, because I want to share the ability to walk us around that Tualap Indian Reservation on Google Earth. And yeah, there I got it. And TJ, you've got the ability, when I turn this one back on, I want you to step in and walk us right here. I'm just stepped into Google Earth Pro, got the Tualap Indian Reservation showing in the middle of the screen, but TJ, walk us around what you see as the ability for that species to share its genetic materials with its nearest neighbors. Okay, if it's all one big population of Odocoileus hemionus variety columbianus, where are the other participants there? Take the show.
Okay, so can you see the mouse moving now, or?
I can't yet, but click and drag something. Yeah, I see you're doing it. You got it, TJ.
Okay, so right here's the reservation, this little kind of like triangle area. Right here's I-5, and then this is Fire Trail, and that's pretty much the boundary to the reservation to the north. So this is where the main deer population is. So they can't really go this way because they can't go to the west because they're not gonna swim across the sound. So that eliminates all the islands and whatnot within the sound. They can't go east because you have I-5, and they probably won't even attempt to cross I-5. And if they did, they'd be right in the city of Marysville right here. And they're not gonna cross the city of Marysville. That'd be a death sentence. They would get hit by a car or something. Then to the south, you have this little bit of water. Yeah, they'll swim across that. But then you're right into the city of Everett, and they can't go any further south than that. And then even if they did, then you'd be going into like Linwood and then into Seattle. To the north, they will go up into here because there's still tree cover for them to hide in during the day. At night, they'll pretty much wander wherever they want, but during the day, they're going to stay hidden in the deep, dark timber with lots of ferns that they can bed and be out of sight. But after that, you get up into here, and it's nothing but farmland. And these deer, they might cross one field, but they will not cross a field just to go into another field. That is not something that they do. And this will stretch for, I think it's like 15, 20 miles to the north of nothing but farmland. They're not going that way. So they're pretty much just restricted to this little area right in here, but really just this area, because that's the only like solid timber. Like this is nothing but timber with just a few logging roads in it. Up in here, there's patches of timber, but they're going to be walking through people's yards all the time, and they're going to be exposing themselves. And black-tailed deer don't generally like to do that unless they know they're 100% safe. And that's where this comes into place. There's not very many people that go out there. I mean, you're talking maybe 2-3 people a day might go out into here. And they feel safe there, and they're just going to stay hunkered down and hidden on the reservation.
I compare and contrast that with the white-tailed deer that we have right here in Pullman, that literally, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but there's white-tailed deer walking through my yard all the time. It's like, you're crazy, right? No, it's because I got a garden out there too in the spring, and they love to come out and visit. They're usually under the cover of darkness, and they get around doing a fine, but never a mule deer. Right, you got Dr. Bill sitting here saying, I'm seeing the deer as they walk in, and I literally get to where I'm kind of naming them. Hey, there's that buck from last year. He's got a little bit bigger. Or here's this doe. She had 2 fawns this year. She only had 1 last year. I'm glad to see she's coming on. Okay, that's because the white-tailed deer doesn't mind being around us pesky humans, but the mule deer, not going to do it. And the black-tailed deer on the coast, right there where TJ is talking about the Tualap Indian Reservation, they're behaving more like the mule deer we see here. Well, they're part of that subspecies of the mule deer. But now, take this another step is I see what you talked about and what we've seen on the photographs there. Those are some big deer. Why would the size be a trait that is favored in that environment? What is it about the larger deer you see, TJ?
I believe we talked about deer and elk even growing, or animals in general, growing a bigger body when they live in brushier habitat. That way they could easily maneuver through. And there is that on the reservation. There's a lot of thick, brushy areas that they can hide in. And we have some big timber patches and they'll go out in it, and that there's actually a lot of forage in them sometimes for them to go and eat. And they go out into that and whatnot. But there are tons of just thick, like salmonberry patches and stuff like that they just go and hide in.
That makes a lot of sense. The larger deer that is going to be able to get through that thick understory. And think about the other speciation event for elk. Remember, we talked about the Cervus canadensis variety nelsoni versus the variety, the Olympic Peninsula elk. I'm losing that. It's after the president's name, Roosevelti variety. Okay, they're the biggest elk subspecies on North America. They're bigger than the elk species in Northern Asia. Well, why do they get bigger? Well, it's because they live in that temperate rainforest areas. Bigger body has a better ability to push through the brush. But at the same time, you got to remember their antlers got smaller too. They're the smallest of the elk species in North America in terms of their antler size. But for the bodies, they're the biggest. Now, that follows just through what TJ was just saying. That may fit the speciation event right here. That the larger deer that literally, TJ, I think you mentioned it to me, they looked more and they felt more like a mule deer that's coming off the Cascade Range. It's like, hey, maybe they crossed the highway and made their way down and just set up a camp right here, but not really. Now, ostensibly, yeah, they did. That is the spread of that species, why we have subspecies now. But that larger size is a response to that restrictive environment where you have more brush. It's lowlands. You've got a lot of vegetative push right there. Okay. These discussions, these ideas, let me spin around one more time there to you, TJ, to say, as you look at that entire mix, do you see that stable population being something that is genetically different from the other subspecies in the area, from what you would normally expect to see as you get a little bit west of there, going over towards Arlington, Darrington, let's say?
So yeah, they definitely appear to be different. I mean, the deer that are up in there in that Arlington, Darrington area, some of them might get to 200 pounds, but it's not like the ratio that you see on the reservation. It's like there are a lot more bigger deer on the reservation than you find elsewhere. It's not to say that you won't like find them elsewhere. Like you can, but you won't find them in the sheer number that you find on the reservation. Like in Arlington, Darrington, the average deer is probably right around 100, 120 pounds. Like it's the average size blacktail in the state of Washington. Whereas on the reservation, the average size deer, including does, might even be upwards of 150, 160 pounds.
That's a big size differential right there. And I think as we're looking at speciation now for all these different topics that we share, folks, what I want you to do when you see this essay question appear on the exam, which I can't guarantee that any one question will be there versus another, but I think you're all betting people. That's why you came to university. You're going to take a bet on being able to learn something new. Okay, this probably will be one of the four. Don't tell anybody. Shh. You're all in the class, so you get to see it now. That this question, when it comes out, you're going to give that example, define, discuss with example, right? And talk about the type of speciation you see and how that fits into maybe Darwin's finches and how these criteria have been met. Everything that TJ has shared and talking about those barriers, it's not going to be able to go east or west or south, a little bit to the north, but again, it's getting into those open fields where it's not a fence that's put up, but it certainly is a barrier to the mule deer. The mule deer like to be under the cover of brush, they're under cover of trees, and in the cover of darkness. That's where they're going to move. It's going to be tough for them to do a lot of genetic sharing going north and south. There's a little bit of it, and that was the unequal distribution of the species. We've seen it, we understand that now, and this will probably be one of those essay questions you can prep up for ahead of time. T.J., before we keep going on with the topic, is there anything else you would share in terms of that?
I think we pretty much nailed it. I mean, maybe something else to add is like the size of the island deer a mile across the sound. I mean, those deer are tiny, especially when compared to reservation deer. It's like not even fair to compare them. Those island deer are just like Sitka blacktail. If one of them hits 100 pounds, you're talking about the biggest deer on the island.
Yeah. You get over here to Orcas Island, they are just tiny deer. They're absolutely no question of that. That's why I said when I got to Vancouver Island, I'm seeing them mainly along the shorelines. And TJ, you've seen those deer right along the shorelines as well. What do you see all across the Puget Sound area? Because you do a lot of fishing out there. You see them. You're right along the shore. So tell us about that.
Yeah, we see them. Like, I've only ever watched videos of deer up in Alaska and whatnot. I haven't had the opportunity to go up there, but it seems like Sitka blacktail to me love to work the shoreline. They love to come down into the lowland and the shoreline and hang out in there. And that's what we see in the island here. It's nothing to see a few while we're out there fishing, just wandering the beaches and roaming around. And they are tiny deer. Like, sometimes we mistake them for people's dogs. They're so small.
I'll absolutely send those out. Okay, we talked about the requirements of the population. You see it all right here. This is all from the lecture notes, the videos that we made on speciation in particular. My best prep for you is to come through and watch those videos again. It's the primary one, and then I sliced it up a little bit to talk about each type of speciation difference. Given examples, using the information that you have here, you're going to be able to just make this one shine, folks. How do you really see the difference in these species? And now another incipient species development, this Tualapii this Tualapii black-tailed deer. That is a super good hit for everybody to hit. And TJ, is there anything before I walk away from this one last time today, anything else you would add to the speciation event of the black-tailed deer on the reservation?
No, I think we pretty much covered it all. I think we touched all the bases that we talked about.
It is something that has interested me enough that TJ and I are going to continue this relationship well after this class is done, because I would love to see us doing a gene sequencing on that deer to see if that is a new subspecies population. It has all the characteristics that I think we can define, discuss with example to prove it out. Right?